Hello, welcome to BikeSocial. Welcome to our middleweight sports bike test of 2024. We've got the Suzuki GSX-8R, Triumph Daytona 660, Yamaha's R7 and Honda's CBR 650R. Let's ride. Well, we've been out all day on these four. Speaking of four, we've got one 4-cylinder, one 3, and 2 twins. Not just these lot. Now, in this outro, we're going to break it down into 5 different parts, and we'll have a chat about each bike. So we'll start with engine performance, but Muff, I'll start with you actually, because you talked about this class being relatively new, didn't you, earlier off camera? Just expand on that, could you?
It feels like only a few years ago, if you wanted to get a middleweight sports bike, your choice was kind of declining year on year once the kind of hardcore Japanese sports bikes started either not being updated for emissions. I think you had the GSX-R faded out, the R6 went track only, the Honda and I think the Kawasaki dipped off a little bit. And there kind of wasn't a lot of choice. There was a lot of middleweight naked bikes, there's a lot of middleweight adventure bikes, but middleweight sports bikes felt like a bit of a dying breed. And then all of a sudden, 2024, we find ourselves with a bunch of new ones and a bunch of updated ones, and we're like spoiled for choice. In fact, it would have been easier to have a 7-bike test rather than a 4-bike test. So it sort of comes to something when you're trying to cut down a class that didn't really exist a couple of years ago.
Well, of course, as soon as we started putting anything on social media about these 4 bikes, everyone said, oh, where's the Aprilia, where's the Kawasaki? I mean, yeah, as you say, we could have...
It's quite a wide class, isn't it? It goes from sort of like some very sort of bottom-end kind of bikes right up to some very top-end kind of bikes. And I think what we've done here is sort of try to select a bit of a middle ground. And you can always say, well, the kind of the bottom bike in this class could fit on the top of another section of bikes. Do you know what I mean?
And it was relevant, the point I made about the price, the fact they are so close together, because really, on paper, these 4 are probably the most rivalrous, if that's even a word.
It shall be now.
Trademark. Cool. All right, let's start then with engine and performance. Who wants to go first? Mr. Milbank.
For engine performance, the one that stood out was the Triumph for me. And wasn't really surprised of that. But at the other end of the spectrum, what really surprised me was when I got on the R7 and started up, I was like, oh, yeah, it's a good motor. But it just, I'd been riding the CBR 650 first. In fact, I rode that and then had a quick go on the R7 before we were doing the proper swapping around. And the difference was striking. But I think I do need to kind of preempt all of this by saying I'm going to have some bias, because I've owned 3 CBR 600s, the old F-Series, FM, FX and an FT. And I've got a ZX6R, so I like inline 4 sports
You've not
bikes.
ridden any of these 4 before, have you?
No.
So were you therefore looking forward to riding the Honda the most?
Yeah, I thought it would be the one that was the most familiar. And in many ways it is. I think I was asking about the CBR 600R, wasn't I? And, RR.
Yeah.
And I think you said, Ty, didn't you? It's actually, this is more like what you used to have, and you're right. It is.
I was going
so
to
much
ask
like
if
what I
you
used
can
to have.
detect a bit of old CBR
Yeah,
DNA in
definitely. It's got that comfortable, easy to use, but still makes you feel good, makes you feel sporty, but doesn't make you feel uncomfy. I think the CBR has got, I love that 4-cylinder motor, but the Daytona has just that edge of excitement for me.
You agree?
I do, yes, because I mean, the multi-cylinders, if you like, the 3-cylinder and the 4-cylinder make the same kind of power, don't they? I think they're about 94 horsepower, and they are both revvy. It's a very sort of specific top-endy kind of power delivery. It's quite thrashy. They're both quite exciting in that kind of an old school kind of way. I found the Daytona to be a bit of a hooligan. I thought the engine was a lot smoother than I expected, because it's quite different to the engine from the Trident and from the Tiger Sport 660. A lot more powerful, different state of tune, but a lot smoother as well, a lot more civilised. I found it really easy to hold a steady throttle on it. The fuelling was beautiful. I found it responsive, like I say, really top-endy. The Honda I didn't find quite as energetic as the Trident, as the Daytona. And then in terms of the two parallel twins, we know the GSX-8R, familiar engine. We've ridden it quite a lot. Lots of bottom end, instant response. And then the R7 kind of did feel like the smallest engine here. It felt like the least powerful, but it was still quite surprisingly nippy. Again, sort of with MT-07s and the naked version in your head. I think is it probably the same state of tune as the MT-07?
It is exactly the same. So
Yeah.
it's 72 horsepower, which means it's 10 horsepower down on the Suzuki,
Yeah.
and it's 20 horsepower down on
Yeah, that
the
explains-
two multi-cylinders.
yeah.
But I have to say, the riding position kind of flatters it because it does make you go like, oh, I'm on a sporty bike here. So it feels faster than the MT-07. But it's definitely kind of the least energetic of this four.
I think you certainly had to work the R7 a lot harder, didn't you, with the gearbox? You had to use the gears and really build those, and to use the revs to get the performance out of it. Certainly when I was riding on the R7 and you guys were energetically riding, and you'd feel as though you're working hard on that bike, aren't you?
I think what you end up doing on the R7 is you spend more time at high throttle openings. I think actually on the road it's not actually slower, but I think you just get more from it, or you extract more out of it.
Yeah.
And it's not the reviest power delivery, because actually it's sort of peak torque and peak power figures are much lower down the revs than something like the Honda, which really needs you to be into 5-figure revs to get it to go.
Yeah.
But that's not lacking low down though either, is it? I don't think.
I think it is a bit.
Yeah?
I think it is a bit out of these four in this context. The Daytona definitely outgrunts the Honda. The Suzuki definitely outgrunts the Honda.
Low down, because at the top the Suzuki forgets everything.
And I think the R7 performs better on the road than it looks on paper.
With the Honda, I felt as though there wasn't a big step change in the middle. It wasn't like a low and a high, but there was definitely sort of two characteristics in the engine. That there was low grunt, but when you are riding it in isolation, it feels fantastic. Then you ride something like the Suzuki with its low grunt, or the Triumph. But then all of a sudden you get to 6,000-7,000 RPM, and all of a sudden it goes, oh, we're getting into that stage, are we? All right, lads, let's crack on.
Yeah.
And away it goes. And you think, well, that is. So there is excitement there.
I think it's worth saying, I had the previous version of the CBR 650R, and it came before they had a quick shifter, or at least the bike I had didn't have a quick shifter. And I found it quite thrashy, and quite a revvy and quite a vibey kind of engine. It was quite lots of revs and it's quite harsh, and the gear change was quite crashy. And that doesn't feel like that at all. With the E-clutch, which I'm sure we'll get into in a minute, it feels incredibly sophisticated, refined, smooth. I couldn't feel any vibes. I couldn't on the Daytona either, but that really does feel like it's kind of a next year. It feels like a bigger, I'm getting into other things now, but it does feel like a bigger bike. It feels like a heavier thing. It just feels like more, the engine is slightly, it feels like it's a little bit bigger, a little bit heavier perhaps.
Interesting you say about vibes, because I definitely did feel them. Definitely, yeah, noticeably so. As in, get off the bike and made a note that it was vibey. So it's
Really?
interesting you mentioned that.
Okay,
Yeah.
it just goes to show how subjective vibrant vibes are.
And it wasn't a bad thing. It wasn't like, oh, it's shaking, or it was affecting the mirrors or anything like that. It wasn't that bad, but it was noticeable.
But if you're talking about vibes though, the R7 is noticeably, it's you could call it a characterful engine, I guess, but it felt the least refined to me. And in some ways you might think that's good, but it just didn't feel like any others. The Suzuki was, I was amazed that's the same configuration as the R7. It feels so different to me. But the way that makes its power is incredibly, that stands out to me of making its power so differently to the others. But I'm using my words carefully here. It stands out because it makes its power very differently to the others.
I totally agree. When I first jumped on the Suzuki, I'd forgotten just how much bottom end there is, and I was genuinely, as I let the clutch out, I went, ooh, there's a little,
does catch you out.
Yeah. Blimey, this thing goes, and then get to 6,000 and it's all over. There's not a lot on the top.
Yeah,
Whereas,
the Suzuki, they haven't changed the state of tune from GSX-8S or V-Strom, and it still does that thing where, it, like you said, hits you hard, and you start revving it thinking it's going to carry on with that enthusiasm, and it doesn't. You can feel it taper off. So that one's all bottom end. That one for me is all top end. The Daytona, for me, blends those two together really well. It kind of has the grunt of the Suzuki with the top end of the Honda. And the R7 is lacking in outright performance, but I don't think anyone got left behind on it. They all managed to keep up, so it is still a credit to it.
I hate to say it, Murphy, but I find myself in total agreement with you.
Oh, what a horrible position to
It
be
is.
in.
It's awful, but you're absolutely right.
Do you think I feel like for people watching this who are from our kind of generation, remember the early 600s, like when the CBR 600RR first came out, we're talking about this being all top end. This isn't all top end like we remember some old 600s, is it?
No.
In fact, that's a good point actually, because I remember going through one of the villages in 6th at 30, and this wasn't labouring, wasn't struggling at all. You could leave that in 6th gear until you had to. I know it does all its clever stuff, but you could leave that in 6th gear and it was fine. So it feels unfair to call this very top endy.
But in the context
In this
of these
context,
four,
but in the context of if you remember what
And a
600
bike
used to be
20
like,
years ago,
yeah,
yeah,
this ain't top
sure,
endy. This has
sure.
got a very usable power delivery.
That's modern fuel injection for you there, and a few other things. Are we going to talk about this e-clutch then, or what?
well, I think if you want to watch a really long-winded 30-minute version of it, there's
Yeah.
a separate video on YouTube. But yeah,
I
it's
think-
an electronic clutch system that removes the need for you to move the clutch at all, unless you want to.
It pulls the clutch, it actuates the clutch. That's all it's doing, isn't it?
My biggest thing is, does it get in the way of me riding the bike the way I want to ride it? And the answer is no. It's absolutely, it integrates with the way I ride pretty seamlessly. And I think the upshifts and the downshifts feel to me like a quick shifter. And I think there are some sort of we can argue about whether we thought it was a good quick shifter or a bad quick shifter. I thought it was a pretty good quick shifter. And then there's the bit at other end, at the end when you come to a halt and you don't need to use a clutch, or you pull away and you don't need to use a clutch. Most of the time, because I'd kind of been using a clutch anyway, I decided that I wanted to use a clutch and went out of auto mode kind of thing. But it worked with me perfectly. So no, it's a Honda gadget that I like with the gearbox. So well done, Honda.
Yeah, I agree. I think E should be for excellent clutch. But it's a very intuitive system, and it doesn't take very long at all to get used to, does it?
I thought it was interesting. You, John, seemed a bit worried about it this
Yeah, I
morning.
didn't
Like,
trust
what
it.
is this new alien technology and I can't work it? And I was thinking, it's not a big deal, really. E-clutch isn't a revolutionary, transformative bit of technology. It doesn't change the way you ride the bike. It doesn't, for me, it doesn't make the difference between choosing that bike over any of the others. You read some of the comments on people, from people who haven't used the system and think that it's going to remove their ability to ride a bike or take away their fun, take away their enjoyment, take away their choice. It is like a quick shifter, and you don't have to pull the clutch in when you come to a stop.
But you can if you want.
But you can if you want.
Yeah.
That's all, kind of all it is.
For me, it
So-
was just I couldn't get my head around the fact that I could put it in, sit there,
Yeah.
put it in first. Yeah, it's all right.
But after one day, you
Oh,
could teach anyone all about that system.
You don't-
So it
yeah,
takes
you
like
don't-
no acclimatization. For me, for all the riding that we've been doing, which has been fast, open countryside stuff, it's effectively just a quick shifter. And for me, it's a really good upshifter, but it's not a great downshifter. I'm not completely convinced that on its smoothness on downshifts, but at least you do have downshifts. Whereas on the Yamaha R7, it's an up-only quick shifter, and I don't think an especially good up-only quick shifter either. Not super
And on the
slick.
Triumph, it's not even there at all.
The
It's an
Triumph,
optional extra.
It is available for another 360 quid or something,
Yeah.
which is quite a cost. And the Suzuki, you do get it included as standard.
Actually, Suzuki's quick
Including the
shifter was pretty
price.
good.
And it's good as well. Yeah,
It's all right,
I think it's for the overall price of the bike. I think it works well.
So can I just get this right then? So it's 4 thumbs up then for the e-clutch?
Yes.
Sure.
Yes.
Yeah,
That's pretty good going.
there's nothing to dislike about it, apart from it's slightly bigger on the side, but not even offensively so.
I don't want to go down another sort of rabbit hole and talk about
No, do.
off on a bit of a tangent. But do you think it's going to encourage more people to ride bikes because you don't have to worry about the clutch?
No,
No.
won't make a jot of difference.
Oh, what do you not think?
Won't make a jot of difference. You still need a full manual license to ride it. So
Oh,
it won't
yeah,
make
yeah,
a-
yeah.
But
I
in
know-
terms of
You're thinking of a confidence
in
thing.
terms
Yeah,
of
in terms of confidence.
I don't think it's about confidence. I don't think it's about new riders. I think it's about adding sophistication to bikes for people who already ride bikes.
I'm not entirely convinced by that. I think there will be 1 or 2, 3, 4, a number of riders, a fixed number of riders who do find that it's actually beneficial to their riding, and it does allow them to access the bike, or will encourage them to access that bike that they may not have done otherwise. Because we've been talking to a lot of riders recently who aren't the most confident of riders, and it's the kind of thing that would help them, I think.
In that case, I hope I'm wrong.
twist and go. Chassis and handling, not necessarily comfort and ergonomics, but chassis and handling, and that'll include suspension, brakes, So, anything to talk... Shall we start with Suzuki? I was on the Suzuki first. It bounced around like a pogo stick. There you are, said it.
There we go.
But I wasn't the only one to feel that, was I?
Well,
Looking at all of you.
I think the first thing we've got to say is that they are all middleweight sports bikes, but they are a new generation of middleweight sports bikes, and don't expect them to suspend, steer, or behave like middleweight sports bikes did 10, 15, 20 years ago, because there are no aluminium frames here. There's very little adjustment on any of the suspension. It is all slightly simpler and more budget focused on all of it, isn't it? So it's kind of not picking with anyone, but
There's nothing
like
fully
you said,
adjustable here, is there?
the forks on the R7 I think are, but I don't think anything else is.
Yeah.
But the one that stood out for the sort of not great reasons was the shock on the Suzuki.
Oh, yeah.
And that's quite surprising, because actually the Triumph, the Honda and the Suzuki all have the same suspension.
Identical.
They all have shower forks and a shower
But the
mod
internal's obviously different.
but that doesn't feel the same as the other two.
No.
Especially on some of the roads that we've been riding today, which are boingy in
It
places.
felt very loose, very goose, fired me out the seat quite a bit, and I get the sense you want to step in and defend its honour and its valour.
You're absolutely right. Well
Okay.
spotted. I wanted to say that it is the worst rear shock here in terms of control.
Yes.
I kind of dig it when it's getting out a bit loosey-goosey, because it's kind of good fun.
Okay.
Like you, I got kicked out of all of these seats today, and the bike that carried on letting me know that I'd been kicked out the seat the longest was the Suzuki, because it does keep going for just a split second after you've recovered. But I'd hesitate to call it a bad rear shock, because in my head, a bad suspension or poor suspension is suspension it robs you of feel, and that normally means that it's harsh or kind of gritty, and it doesn't really let you feel what's going on. The Suzuki lets you feel what's going on. It might not have a complete grip on the situation, but at least you know it's kind of like there or thereabouts. Do you know what I mean?
Sure.
So it's not harsh, it's not aggressive, it's not low quality, it's just
I think the
not
Suzuki's,
right.
I think it's all right if you're just not going to push hard.
Oh God, yeah. Yeah. I mean,
And that used to be a thing actually for me when the MTs first came out, and it was just kind of getting parroted almost. Every buyer would go, "Well, of course, this suspension's rubbish. You've got to get it completely rebuilt." You're like, really? I think the way they'd normally be ridden, they're fine, and that's fine. But we were cracking on and having fun. And there was a bend where I was following you, and that proper surprised me. And I didn't like it, not in a good way. Whereas this, for me, just feels like a really good balance of being able to enjoy myself on it within my limits of what I can do, and it not feeling out of shape, but it also being quite compliant and comfortable. That's the balance. Feels like it's in the wrong class here. For me.
Again, we're arguing about sort of bits and bobs here. I thought the Honda was the heaviest steering.
Yes.
It was the slowest steering.
Yeah.
It was the one when you go sticking it into a corner and a bump or an undulation makes the bike move around a bit and your line begins to change. It's the one that requires the most, I better put some effort in to get this thing to go back to where I want it to be. Yeah. Even the Suzuki, when it was oscillating, was still roughly pointing in the right direction and quite easy to direct it back where it needed to be. I thought this is, and this is marginal because it's supremely stable. I think ride quality was probably the best here, although the Triumph is really good.
The Triumph felt a bit more twitchy, but in a good way. Had that flap over a crest. I was like, cool.
Yeah.
So it wasn't in a bad way. They all felt stable, but that felt the most refined.
I think this is the Triumph suspension matches its engine really well. In that they're both kind of really keen. They're really up for it. They're really eager. They're quite tight and aggressive and sporty and good fun. I thought the ride quality was pretty good on it. I think the balance of the bike was really good. The first time I sat on it and rode it, I was thinking, this just feels poised. It's
I'm really
nice.
glad you say that, because I attended the world launch of it. You'll see the video for that on Bennetts BikeSocial YouTube. And there were a lot of question marks over it. There was a big variety of opinions about whether the Daytona 660's balance and its suspension quality was good enough, basically. And I thought for most riding, most of the time it was. But when you end up pushing on fast, that it feels a bit tail heavy. And I'm kind of glad that nobody here has turned around and said, "What are you talking about? It's a pile of muck."
Yeah, it's
Everyone
not.
seems quite happy with how the Daytona steers here, so that's really good.
Oh, and I'd never have guessed that some people thought it was tail heavy from the way we were riding today. It didn't feel that way to me at all.
So on some of the faster sections of the road that we were riding, which of the four would you say handles the best in terms of its is sporty? Is that the right term here? Which is the one that you'd prefer to ride most aggressively?
Do you know, I'm going to put a word in for the Yamaha R7, I think, because it's substantially lighter than the other three, it's shorter than the other three, and I suspect it's more aggressive in its geometry than the other three. And I think if you can separate engine and ergonomics, I think the way it steers is actually really exciting. It's the most agile, it's the most dynamic.
Yeah.
But it sort of requires you to put the effort in to get to the corner as quick as the others.
I think it stands alone, doesn't it, actually, out of these
I
four?
think it's the most different in its steering, certainly steering speed and steering input.
John, how about you?
Yeah, I'd agree, really. The one I'd go for is CBR.
Yeah.
Just over the Daytona. But yeah, the R7's geometry and everything is probably more sporty.
I think it goes with age. I think in your 20s, get the R7.
Nice.
In your 30s, get the 660. In your 40s, probably get the Honda. In your 50s, you probably go with the Suzuki. In so many different ways.
Yeah, well, that might
How
be
long have you been thinking about that? Because that is perfect.
You just thought of that.
We could probably end the video there, couldn't we? There are several other sections to go.
Oh, sadly.
But that's pretty much it, isn't it? Not a spoiler. Right, let's move on. Another section, comfort and ergo, or riding position, let's call it perhaps.
I think that sort of ties into the way they handle and the way they steer, because they are quite different riding positions. There's certainly 3 different riding positions across the 4 bikes, isn't there? I mean, I guess if we come back to the R7, it's far and away the most aggressive. It's the most classic super sport riding position, the most compact. The bars are the lowest. Is it the only one whose clip-ons are underneath the top yoke? It looks like it.
And they're nicely made looking as well, aren't they?
Your pegs are high, the seat's high. I think it's the tallest seat. You feel the most scrunched up and pitched right over the front end of the bike. Dramatically different to the other 3 bikes. And you either like that, like you said, if you're in your 20s or your 30s, or it maybe starts to grate on you a little bit if you're an older person.
It was definitely the bike that when I first got on it, I felt the silliest.
Did you?
Given my age and my mass,
Right.
and proportions. It was the one where I thought, oh, this looks ridiculous.
Yeah.
Having then ridden it for a little while, I thought, who cares about that?
Get
It's
into it a
amazing.
bit,
This is really good fun.
Yeah.
I feel young again. But,
And then I think
but
sort
it is
of-
quite extreme. But it's interesting how, as a parallel twin, it's so opposite to the Suzuki, which is at the other end of the scale.
Polar difference,
With-
polar opposite.
As soon as you get on that, you're like, wow, these bars are actually really high. This is really comfortable, spacious. Lots of your arms are actually quite wide on it.
Yeah, your back angle's much more upright.
Yeah.
Yeah, the bars on the Suzuki like almost reach up off the top yoke, and they sort of, relative to the R7, feels like you sat on a naked
You
bike
can
or a
sit
chopper.
properly upright on
Yeah.
that bike like that.
For me, the riding position on the GSX-8R kind of slightly spoils the sporting credibility of the bike.
Yeah.
Because you are sat so upright and so comfortable, I find it hard to lose myself in the pretense that I'm on a sports bike.
Yes.
And that's a bit of an issue for me, but I think it does depend on what you use these bikes for. And if you want a bit more of an all-round bike that you could commute to work on or do a bit of distance on, I can see the benefit of that riding position.
Yeah.
But it's just hard to pretend that you're on a sports bike.
It is quite, it is. And it is quite surprising that it is so upright. And then the Triumph and the Honda are kind of in between. And almost, I was riding them both thinking, are these identical riding positions or is there some kind of difference? And if there is a difference, for me, it's so small that I can't really detect it. I'm sure if you could pick something up, then tell me. But they felt very similar to me.
The only thing I could think is the Triumph feels slightly like the bars are slightly narrow. I think the bike feels slightly slimmer.
It does.
Thinner.
That's true, yeah.
And that might be a 3 versus 4 cylinder thing.
Yeah.
The CBR has a really nice riding position. It's
nice,
It's spacious, it's well balanced,
Yeah.
and you don't feel like you're on a beginner bike. It kind of feels quite a grown-up,
It's
sophisticated
substantial, isn't it?
thing.
It's certainly the bike that I would want to do the most miles on.
Which is weird because you kind of think the Suzuki
With its riding position.
is the more comfortable riding position.
If I went in terms of pure comfort, for doing some sort of distance, not that I really would on any of these bikes necessarily, I'd go Suzuki, Honda, Triumph, Yamaha. That would be my order, I think.
Just certainly, you're right. The three other than the Yamaha have got the same seat height. So in terms of peg to seat distance, in the riding that we did today, I certainly didn't have any issue in terms of comfort. And then you get off any of these three, and then get on the Yamaha, you think, oh, got to hoik those bad boys up again.
But you see, if you were half your age,
Yes.
you wouldn't think twice about it. You'd think that those three were kind of pretenders, and the R7's the only genuine sports bike riding position here. So, I mean, in terms of if you were a shorter rider, you mentioned seat heights. I don't think any of them are especially difficult to kind of get on with or to manage.
No.
They all seem quite easy going.
The Yamaha's very narrow as well. For it, even though it has the highest seat height, it is a smaller dimensional.
Yeah, and lighter.
Yeah. It's 23 kilos of difference, between the Honda and the Yamaha.
Yeah, it feels
isn't
it.
it? Yeah.
You can tell. You can tell the Honda is the heaviest. Not in a particularly negative way.
No.
It just feels like it has more mass in the engine. You're sitting on something that weighs more.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean,
But at low speed, they're all really nicely balanced. And then,
Right.
I think for me, you only kind of feel the weight once you get up to speed and start trying to throw it about.
yeah.
So we move on. Gadgets and features is next. On our
Gadgets
list.
and features.
Yeah. So
Where
we've
should we
talked about
start?
e-clutch. What are the main differences? We've talked about quick shifters actually already, haven't we, as well?
Yeah.
Well, there's the dash on the Triumph. It's just...
Yeah, that's worth mentioning
It's-
because that's a feature. Not in a good way.
Okay.
Why do I want to see the date all the time? And it turns out you'd mentioned this already in your review, hadn't you?
In terms of dashes, then, you've got the Honda and the Suzuki both have TFT displays, big colour, tablet-like type things. The Yamaha is a LCD display,
Yes.
and Triumph can't quite decide which to do, so it does both. It's got a little bit of LCD at the top and a little bit of TFT at the bottom. And I think the problem with the Triumph is that it's not especially well laid out. So there are multiple kind of screens that you can go through, one of which shows you your gear position. But then if you move away from that screen, your gear position is shown somewhere else on the dash. And yes, like you said, one of the screens is just to show you the date.
To be fair, it's not that bad. And scrolling through it, the gear position moves, but then it gets really small. And it just feels odd when they've gone, okay, gear position, this is a key one, probably going to be riding fast.
Is it?
I don't need to know the date.
Is it a deal breaker? The fact that it's got the date.
So
If you
you
love
say
the
that.
rest of the
No, you say
bike-
that though. But for me, one of the really, really important things for me on a bike, and I've sold bikes because of it, is the view I get of the dash.
Absolutely.
And that cockpit view.
Yes. Getting into sort of the build quality or the finish quality of the bikes.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think, generally speaking, the component quality of the Yamaha is really high. It's got some really nice sort of, like the forks and the brakes and the fork tops and the top yoke. It's the cockpit.
There's some
layout.
nice machining on it,
There's
isn't
some
there?
nice metal in there, and you look at the Suzuki, and it's got the lovely bolt-on subframe, which is great.
Looks good.
But then the actual clip-ons, the handlebars are
They're
not
yeah,
so
no,
clever.
the black plastics on the side I think are a bit plasticky.
And then you look at the CBR, which is generally overall the switchgear is lovely, especially compared to the Triumph.
Yeah, it's got the best switchgear.
But the welded subframe looks a bit cheap and tacky.
Yeah, some of the welding and some of the casting on the clip-ons is a little bit rough.
Yeah.
But it's still, I really like the look of that. The Yamaha feels like there's bits of panels missing. You said it, didn't you? There's a lot of bare fasteners. The Triumph, there's things like the rear brake lever is pretty cheap looking. But those kind of things don't bother me as much as the cockpit view. The cockpit view is a deal breaker for me.
What's
I
your
could-
favourite cockpit view of the four of them?
Of these or of any
of
bike?
these four.
Of these, the Honda.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'd say the Suzuki for me. I think it's got the clearest dash.
Is it the easiest to use? In terms of the switchgear? In terms of...
Well, we all had a
How
good rummage around trying to
interactive.
find the trip reset on the Honda.
Yeah.
The Triumph's okay with its intuitiveness. Yeah, I think the Suzuki's
And
quite
the
easy
operations
to
and the
use.
buttons as well.
I think the
Because
Suzuki's
that's
quite
important.
easy to use.
If you're sitting and riding the bike, then
Yep.
that's what you're seeing, isn't it? I couldn't help but notice with the Yamaha, you've got a small little screen in the middle and you've got loads of cables and wires and then some fastenings, and it's not the most attractive look,
No.
is it?
In terms of the rest of kind of gadgets and tech and stuff, I mean, 3 of them have traction control. The Yamaha doesn't. None of them have anything lean sensitive or cornering.
None of them got cornering ABS?
No, none of them have
I thought that's fairly
EMUs.
normal now.
And we've kind of been through the e-clutch and the quick shifters. There's no cruise control on any of them. So actually the specs kind of fairly...
Yeah.
much
Bluetooth
much
connectivity standard on the Honda, accessory
think
on the
so.
Triumph.
I think so.
The other two don't. The one thing I would mention about is the key position, where the ignition barrel is on both the Suzuki and Honda. Honda, if you're going to have a key there, you're going to want one key alone, no key ring, no other keys, because they're just going to clatter about on the tank.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the Suzuki, the key's right in the middle of where you want to look. It seems to poke out so high.
Yeah.
So it's not as bad as some of the KTMs where you couldn't actually reach it. But actually, gadget features and things like that. Storage space.
Yes,
on the
Honda.
Honda.
Under the
I
seat.
thought that was a thing in the past. You could roll a chain up and get that, lightweight chain. It's a good storage space. There's actually a bit of space under the R7's rear seat, but there's a bar across it, so you can't actually use it. But the Honda, that's really good. I know you might take the piss, but you can get snacks and stuff in there. A lock.
I don't know, you can get snacks in the front and in the middle of the fairing there.
Massive space under there.
Massive chasm.
But yeah, I think storage space under the seat is a important thing.
Right, our final section then before we come to some form of verdict is value, economy, PCP, running costs, ownership, that kind of thing. So we mentioned at the start of the out that there's only £220 between them as they stand.
Yes,
because the
but-
Yamaha's actually got a.
But it does depend on what spec you get each of them in, doesn't it? So the cheapest on paper is the Triumph Daytona, £8,595, but not that one.
No.
Because it's red, and red is clearly more. Red is clearly
Premium.
£100 more. So 8,695 for the Triumph. But then, I think as we said, if you want a quick shifter, that's another 300 quid on top of that. And if you want Bluetooth, it's more. The Honda, with its E-clutch, 8,699. So actually the same price, give or take 4 quid. E-clutch is only £100. So it's not a lot for quite
Introductory offer.
Is it?
terms and conditions apply while you wait.
Is it going to go up?
Oh, I
That
don't
does
know.
seem very good.
It seems exceptionally good, doesn't it?
Because you compared it to the quick shifter. If you went, I want an e-clutch, I want a quick shifter.
That's about 300 quid. So it's a third of the price of a quick shifter with more functionality than a quick shifter.
Yeah. But if you only want to use it as a quick shifter, that's fine.
Might as well just buy the e-clutch.
Just have the e-clutch.
Yeah.
All of this is irrelevant to the ladies and gentlemen who are watching this in 6 months' time.
And then I guess a step up from that is the Suzuki, which is 8,899 with the quick shifter. Confusingly and surprisingly, the most expensive is the Yamaha. £8,916. So it's only a little bit more. Doesn't include the quick shifter. You sort of
random
get the
price,
sense that they've spent the money maybe on the chassis parts or maybe on the suspension and the brakes rather than spending it on whatever the other guys have spent it on.
Just thinking, I'm sitting and looking at the Brembo label
Yeah, the
on the
radial
master
master
cylinder.
cylinder, I think,
Thinking, there's a few
Because
quid
the
gone in
Yamaha's
there.
own calipers, aren't they?
Also, just coming back to the price, of course, the Yamaha's the oldest one. It would have been priced before these three entered the market.
I guess so.
It might be relevant.
I guess so. It's also possible that they spent a bit more money on the tyres because the
S22s.
R7 comes on really nice Bridgestone Sports S22 tyres. And I think the rest kind of come on, I don't know, home market tyres. You know what I mean?
Daytona's Michelin Power 6 and then Dunlop Road Sport 2s for the other two,
Yeah.
the Suzuki and Honda.
If you want to do finance,
Yes,
who
sir.
likes finance numbers?
Always.
PCPs are pretty close. For the same deposit, the Triumph and the Daytona are both just under 100 quid per month.
Well, the same deposit of £2,000.
£2,000.
We need to add that
Yes,
in.
thank you, Martin Lewis. The R7 is a little bit cheaper at about £85. The bargain on PCP is the Suzuki at less than 75 quid a month. And then kind of servicing is all much of a muchness. Not an awful lot in it. Fuel economy. Well, we did get some fuel economy figures today. I don't quite know how relevant or repeatable they are based on our enthusiastic riding.
Hang on, we can't get prosecuted for fuel
For fuel
economy.
economy? Is that not? Okay. All right. So the fuel economy we measured today, the most economical was the Yamaha R7.
Which has the smallest tank.
It was also the first to have the fuel light on and the first we thought was about to run out of fuel and leave us stranded at the side of the road. But 45 mpg in our enthusiastic riding, which is pretty good going. Fuel light was on at what, 75, 80 miles?
Something like that, yeah.
And by 100 we were starting to fret.
I thought we'd run out as we got into the petrol station. I thought it was just starting to splutter, but I
Yeah.
think we ended up putting. I think it's had a few litres left in it, didn't
Just
it?
about.
13-litre tank, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's a small tank.
It is a tiny
It is a small tank. But that said, the Triumph and the Suzuki are only 14-litre tanks.
And they were flashing. Well, the Suzuki was flashing.
And they were both flashing. The winner in terms of longevity, the one that lasted the longest was the Honda with its 15 and a bit litre tank. Didn't even have the fuel light on. And it's the second best on fuel economy, 41 mpg. The Triumph was 39, only a little bit behind, and the Suzuki, probably best not to say because I do think you could get prosecuted for that. Yeah, it was pretty poor on fuel.
Okay. So with your £9,000, what are you buying?
I'll tell you first and foremost, the one I'm not buying is the Suzuki. It's the one I'm least convinced by. It's the one that feels the least like a sports bike to me. It's the one I think the suspension is the least impressive, and I find the power delivery least suited to sporty riding. The R7 is the next one that I'm least going to buy because I'm too old for it. And that leaves a tough choice between the Honda and the Triumph. I think the Honda feels more polished, more sophisticated and more rounded, but I think the Triumph's a much more exciting bike to ride. So for me, I'll take the Triumph.
Simon?
I'm pretty much the same, I think. I mean, dismissing them, I dismiss the Yamaha first because I admire what it is and its componentry, but it is too young for me and it hasn't got enough performance to sway me in its favour. I think I'd put the Suzuki and the Triumph on level pegging, really. Completely opposite bikes in lots of ways. I think I like the excitement of the Daytona, and I kind of like the ease of use of the Suzuki. And I agree that I don't think either of them are particularly brilliantly put together in terms of like, oh, look at the build quality on that. But I think the clear winner for me is the Honda.
Yeah, really?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's it's got the best combination of characteristics. The thing I really, if I'm buying a bike, I am looking for some sort of, as you were saying, that touch point quality. All the bits that are in contact with the bike and the stuff I can see. It does look...
the switchgear feels the best
the
quality.
nicest, yeah, by a mile.
I was quite disappointed with the switchgear on the Triumph. The indicator is
it's flimsy, isn't it?
Yes,
Spongy.
yeah.
So yeah, I think in terms of comfort, engine performance, ease of use, and looks too. Actually, I've got to say, I think it looks the best. It's the only one that's kind of excitingly not styled. The graphics are exciting, the colours are exciting. These are all a bit dowdy. I mean, I thought that was brown all day. You're telling me it's red?
Apparently so. Apparently, yeah.
It is also available in black for a £100 premium.
So there you go, that's me.
Come on then, Mr. John. What do you reckon?
Without hesitation, the Honda.
Yeah?
Yeah,
Without
definitely. But then there's more hesitation on the others. Well, actually, no, it's not.
The Triumph. Where you'd put your money. So that
the Honda, for me, yes, it's that. There's certain bits where I look at it and think, that's a little bit disappointing. But that's where I look at it and go, fair play for what I pay for this. Fair enough that there's a bit of a ropey looking weld there, or the casting finishing isn't quite perfect. But look, when we were stopping, I was getting off and looking back at it and thinking that looks cool. That just looks really, really good. The Triumph is a kind of a close second for me. It's definitely without hesitation. This one is the one I don't. The Triumph surprised me how much I liked it. I do like that. Engine's pretty exciting. It's quite an exciting position. But for me, I'm old, and I'm like, well, I think the novelty would start to wear off. And also, it's that cockpit view for me, and those touch points, really good way of putting it, disappoint me. Then I'm left with those two.
Jekyll and Hyde.
Yeah, the R7, I kind of feel like I kind of want one just to ride around Cadwell on. It looks, and I'm really impressed with some of the machining on it. I love the clip-ons and things like that on it. I think there's some really nice engineering on it. But when I'm riding it, it feels the cheapest. The engine feels cheaper to me. And this feels ironic because I remember when the MT-07 came out and it was like, whoa, Yamaha's changed the face of motorcycling. Motorcycling's back because of Yamaha bringing out this incredibly affordable MT-07. Although the price had to creep out, and an engineer once told me they were pretty well doing them at a loss. How true that is, I don't know, but they were apparently priced. Yeah, that's true. This was as they started to come up in price again. But then the Suzuki, exactly with you. When I got on that to do the first go on it, and it pulled away, I was like, bloody hell, this thing's awesome! And then, oh no, it's not. And the suspension disappointed me, and it's very upright. bear in mind I own a GS. I feel like I'm not old enough for that.
Wow,
And what about you?
confession time.
What about you, Michael?
Right, yes. Well, I concur with many of your thoughts. If I were to own one, if I would have that, what is it called? Garage wood. So you open your garage door and you enjoy looking at one of those particular bikes, or certainly the one that I would like to ride now. You know, give me, for the keys are on the table, the one I'd want to take home is the Honda.
Really? Wow.
I'm really close with the Triumph again. I love that engine. I think once you get it on song, I mean, the first time I rode it on the A1 down to Milton Keynes, which is not particularly exciting in any way, and it left me high and dry really, because I thought, oh, well, this is just not for me. And then if you ride it in the way it's supposed to be ridden, or the way in which it's been designed for. And actually, you know, well, we made the point earlier on, didn't we, about in a way the Yamaha kind of stands a little bit far apart from the other three, and then from what we've been talking about, I don't necessarily agree, but the Suzuki tends to have its own separate path now as well. I find the Suzuki a lot closer to the Triumph and the Honda than perhaps what you guys have said, but I think the Honda as a package, in terms of its comfort and handling and performance and that e-clutch and refinement, is what I want.
I've got a question for you. So the first time that when you first rode this the other day, you rode down the A1, it was in the wet, and I remember talking to you afterwards, and you was kind of a bit like, oh, is that it? If you'd been on the Honda instead, do you think you'd have been quite as down, or would you have been?
Maybe. I think it's because it was the ride that I was doing as opposed to the bike that I was on.
Okay.
I think I wanted
I don't know if the
something with-
Honda's civility might make it a bit better.
Maybe. I think maybe comfort over distance, perhaps. The Honda does have comfort over distance versus the Triumph.
So there we go. There we are.
That's our decisions.
Honda wins.
Can't believe
yeah.
the CBR's won.
Yeah.
I'm amazed.
I do think they
Well, in some ways, it's kind of the oldest design, isn't it? It's 10 years old, and all these new bikes have turned up in the past couple of years. I mean, I think it does offer perhaps the kind of closest to an old-fashioned super sports riding experience.
Yeah.
Because it is a four-cylinder, because it does require the most revs. So, what does that speak more about us as riders
Us
than
as
it does about
riders
the
than it does
bikes?
about the bike.
I don't want to be offering a cop-out here, but there was something you said earlier that I thought is really pertinent here. None of these are a bad choice. And I don't want it to be like some kind of... But I do think they're very much... You would be disappointed if you bought, say, the Suzuki expecting an R7.
Yeah.
And equally, you'd be disappointed if you bought the R7 expecting to have a reasonably comfortable ride. You know, something that you can get on with. I feel like the Suzuki has been unfairly... It feels unfair the way I've been criticising this because of it's what we're comparing it to.
It's all about what you want in a bike. We talked earlier, I think off camera, perhaps, that if you were to use that as a commuter, if it was an all-rounder,
Range is a bit rubbish for that, though.
but it has positives.
Yeah, it's not. The range isn't brilliant for all of them.
No.
I can totally see. I mean, I rode a GSX-8R for a year. Sorry, Suzuki. Come on, what are you doing?
Names.
Yes,
The one,
yes.
the two, the three others.
So I rode the 8S for a year and absolutely loved scudding about on it. It was brilliant for bombing about and just generally... And equally, the V-Strom 800D, I had that for a while as well, and that's the same kind of thing. They're really usable bikes. They're really benign and easy and friendly to wheel out of a garage and get on. Like I say, it kind of is the purchase of the head of all of these rather than the heart. That's like 100% heart.
Yeah.
That's like,
Yeah.
80% head. And these... That sounds wrong. And these two are somewhere in the middle,
Well, I think this edges it because it's a CBR. The
Yeah,
CBR
yeah,
always
yeah.
was the...
Yeah. I agree.
There's too much head.
Wait.
Go with a bit more heart. Have a bit more heart.
You can't have too much head, Mufka.
And on that bombshell.
Please, let's leave it there. We could sit here and talk about this for a long time yet. And what would be great is to have your opinion as well. What would be nice, actually, is to give us your age as well. So if you've ridden any of these, or if you own any of these, or if you've ridden something like these, tell us how old you are and what you use it for, as well as your opinion on the good bits and the not so good bits. So that would be good. Yes, in that comments thing below. Good. Thanks so much for joining us.
Who should we get our insurance from?
Bennetts, I reckon. Probably best to go there first. BikeSocial membership. You must be a BikeSocial member. It's the law, according to us. You get membership Includes about 160 different discounts and offers and all sorts of brilliant things, especially if you're a BSB fan. There's lots there to enjoy. And it's free with your insurance if you insure directly with Bennetts. But it's also accessible by paying £6 a month or £60 a year as well. Our Facebook group is Bennetts BikeSocial, so come and join us there. There's about 7,000, is that right, John?
Yeah.
About 7,000 people in there at the moment. It's a very friendly and lovely place to be. Good, that's all I think in terms of housekeeping. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time. Oh, lads, ready salted crisps, blah, blah, blah. Welcome to BikeSocial and welcome to our You're going to fall over that, aren't you? Won't be me falling over.
I need to move. You get up, otherwise you go out short.
Say again.
I need to move.